You think awakening is going to feel like freedom. You think that once you fully step into your power as an empath, once you do the work, face the wounds, clear the patterns, life is going to open up like something beautiful and finally, mercifully easy. It doesn't. Awakening doesn't feel like sunrise. It feels like surgery. It is the systematic removal of every comfortable illusion you use to survive on. Every people-pleasing habit, every self-betrayal you called kindness, every relationship you maintained by making yourself smaller than you actually are. And it hurts, specifically, precisely, in exactly the places you were hoping it wouldn't reach. Let's talk about what you actually expected. Because the expectation matters, and the gap between that expectation and reality is where most empaths get lost. You expected relief. You expected that doing the inner work would feel like finally putting down a weight you'd been carrying for years. And in moments it does. There are genuine flashes of clarity, of lightness, of finally understanding why you are the way you are, and feeling something close to peace about it. But then the clarity keeps going. It doesn't stop at the comfortable revelations. It doesn't conveniently halt at the insights that make you feel good about yourself and leave the rest undisturbed. It goes all the way in. And all the way in means looking at the relationships you've been excusing, the patterns you've been repeating, the ways you have participated, actively, repeatedly, sometimes willingly, in your own diminishment. The moments you called compassion that were actually fear, the boundaries you never held, not because you didn't know where they should be, but because the cost of holding them felt too high. Awakening shows you all of it, without flattery, without the protective filter of self-deception that made it possible to keep functioning without confronting what was really happening. And here's the part that genuinely shocks most empaths when they reach it. The hardest thing awakening asks you to face is not other people. It is yourself, not the wounded version of yourself. That part, as painful as it is, feels familiar. You've been living with that wound long enough that even its weight has become a kind of comfort. The hardest thing to face is the version of yourself that chose, over and over again, to stay unconscious because consciousness was too demanding. The version that saw the truth and looked away, that felt the misalignment and ignored it, that knew with the full force of that deep empathic knowing that something was wrong and stayed anyway, because staying was easier than the earthquake that leaving would cause. That self-confrontation, unflinching, unforgiving, completely honest, is the real work of awakening. And it is not a single moment. It is a daily, ongoing, sometimes exhausting commitment to seeing yourself as clearly as you see everyone else. Here's what nobody tells you before you start this process. The truth that gets quietly left out of every soft, palatable conversation about empathic awakening. You don't just wake up to the world, you wake up to yourself. And waking up to yourself means confronting every version of you that was built for survival rather than truth. Every mask worn so long it started to feel like a face. Every self-betrayal that so normalized it stopped registering as betrayal at all. That confrontation is not comfortable. It does not leave you unchanged in ways that are always easy to live with. It does not come with a clean timeline or a guaranteed outcome or the assurance that the people in your life will understand what is happening to you and respond with patience and grace. Most of them won't, and that is a conversation for later. For now, just this. Awakening is real. The power on the other side of it is real. The version of yourself that exists beyond the wounds and the patterns and the carefully constructed survival mechanisms is more alive, more clear, and more genuinely powerful than anything you have accessed yet. But the path between here and there runs directly through the most uncomfortable terrain your inner life contains. And whether you are genuinely ready for that, not inspired by it, not romanticizing it, but truly ready for the full cost of it, is the only question that matters right now. The first thing awakening takes from you is your tolerance for pretending. And you won't realize how much of your life was built on pretending until it's gone. Pretending that certain relationships were healthier than they were. Pretending that certain dynamics were acceptable because confronting them felt too costly. Pretending that the discomfort you felt in certain rooms, around certain people, in certain versions of your own life was something you could simply manage, minimize, and move on from. You cannot do that anymore. And the loss of that tolerance doesn't arrive as a dramatic revelation. It doesn't announce itself with clarity and ceremony. It arrives quietly, in ordinary moments, as a kind of internal refusal that you didn't consciously choose but suddenly cannot override. You sit in a conversation that you would have previously navigated without friction, nodding, accommodating, performing the version of agreement that kept things smooth, and something in you simply will not do it anymore. Not out of defiance, not out of anger, just a quiet, immovable refusal that rises up from somewhere deeper than decision. You are in a dynamic that you used to manage through self-compromise, through making yourself smaller, more agreeable, less honest than you actually are, and the self-compromise no longer works, not because you haven't tried, but because the part of you that used to execute it on command has gone offline, permanently. That is awakening, removing your ability to pretend, and it is simultaneously a liberation and a devastation, because here is what that removal reveals. The thing underneath the pretending that you were using the pretending to avoid seeing, most of the life you were living before was not really yours. Not the relationships, not the version of yourself you showed up as in most of the not the daily compromises you called maturity, the silences you called wisdom, the tolerance you called strength. It was a life assembled from other people's comfort, built around the edges of what others could handle, rather than the center of what you actually needed, constructed so carefully over so many years that it stopped feeling like a construction and started feeling like just the way things were. You didn't build a life, you built an accommodation. An endlessly refined, deeply habitual, quietly suffocating accommodation to a world that never asked you to be fully yourself and that you never challenged to do so. Awakening challenges it on your behalf without asking your permission. And what comes after that challenge is the part that requires everything you have. Because once you see that the life you were living wasn't really yours, you cannot simply swap it out for the right one overnight. You cannot instantly replace decades of accumulated self-compromise with authentic living just because you now understand the difference. What you can do, what awakening actually asks of you in this specific moment, is stop adding to it. Stop making new compromises in the old pattern. Stop building new architecture on the foundation of the old accommodation. Start one choice at a time, constructing something that is actually yours, not for anyone else's comfort, not fit inside anyone else's expectations, not to remain palatable to people whose approval you have already paid far too high a price to maintain. The relationships that cannot survive this shift will fall away, and grieving them, even the ones you know were necessary to release, is one of the loneliest passages awakening produces. But hold this truth through that grief. Hold it tightly on the days when the loss feels like confirmation that you made a mistake. What falls away when you stop pretending was never holding you up, it was holding you down. And the ground beneath your feet is more solid now, not despite the loss, but because of it. This is the part nobody warns you about. The part that blindsides even the most prepared. When you awaken as an empath, when you step fully into your perception, your boundaries, your refusal to perform, or pretend or absorb what isn't yours, we become deeply uncomfortable for certain people to be around. Not because you are unkind, not because you are aggressive or superior or difficult in the ways they will accuse you of being, but because your presence, your clarity, your refusal to participate in collective unconsciousness acts like a mirror. And most people are not ready to see what a clear mirror shows them. Think about what that actually means in the lived reality of your daily relationships. You stop laughing at things that aren't funny to protect someone's ego, and they notice, not consciously at first, but they feel the absence of your validation like a withdrawal, and they reach for more. And when it doesn't come, something shifts in how they experience being around you. You stop agreeing with things you don't believe to keep the peace, and the peace breaks, not because you said anything cruel, not because you attacked anyone's position, simply because your refusal to perform agreement in a space that has always run on performed agreement disrupts the entire social contract that space was built on. You stop absorbing the emotional chaos that people deposit into your space and calling it support. You stop being the place where others come to unload without reciprocity, to be endlessly held without ever holding back. And the people who relied on that arrangement, who built their relationship with you entirely around your willingness to give without limit, experience your boundary not as healthy self-protection, but as abandonment. They will call you cold, distant, changed in ways they don't like, selfish, even, as though the ending of their unlimited access to your energy is somehow a theft rather than a correction. And here's where it gets particularly painful, because some of the people who react this way are not malicious. They are not calculating. They are simply people who genuinely need, why and loved the version of you that was available in ways you are no longer available, and they don't know how to relate to the version that has boundaries, discernment, and an unwillingness to perform smallness for their comfort. They aren't villains. They are just incompatible with who you are becoming, and the grief of outgrowing people who are not bad, just misaligned, is a specific kind of loss that is very hard to justify to yourself or explain to anyone else, because there is no clear wrongdoing to point to, no betrayal to name, just a growing, undeniable distance between where you are and where they are willing to go. That distance is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to stop pretending it isn't there. Here is the harsh realization that will challenge everything you thought awakening would give you. You thought awakening would attract people. You thought becoming more genuinely yourself would draw in the deep, authentic connections you've always wanted. That showing up as your real self would finally bring the belonging that performing your acceptable self never quite delivered, and eventually it does. That part is true. But first, before the right people arrive, the wrong ones leave. And the in-between, the period between the leaving and the arriving, is a loneliness so specific and so profound that it will test your commitment to everything you've chosen. The more awake you become, the smaller your inner circle gets. Not forever, but for long enough to make you question everything. You will sit in that shrinking circle and wonder if you made a mistake. If the awakening was worth this, if the clarity and the boundaries and the refusal to pretend are actually gifts or just elaborate justifications for an isolation you could have avoided by staying unconscious. They are gifts. Let that be unambiguous. But gifts at this level do not arrive without cost. And the cost of awakened perception in this specific season of your development is tolerating the discomfort of a world that has not yet caught up to where you are. The shocking truth is this: awakening will cost you popularity before it gives you belonging. It will dismantle the wide, shallow network of connections maintained through self-compromise before it delivers the narrow, deep, unshakable bonds that are actually capable of holding who you are becoming. Most people retreat in the transition. They pull back from the edge of their own becoming because the loneliness of the in-between feels like proof that something has gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. You are simply in the most honest, most necessary, most profoundly uncomfortable passage of your entire development. And the only way out is through fully, without retreat, without apology, without dimming the sea. Clarity that got you here. Air is what awakening actually builds in you. The part that exists on the other side of everything it costs. An awakened empath is not soft. Let that land. The world has a story about empaths, that they are gentle, passive, endlessly accommodating, perpetually healing everyone around them while quietly sacrificing themselves, that their depth is synonymous with fragility, that their sensitivity makes them vulnerable in ways that need to be managed and protected. That story is about unawakened empaths who haven't yet done the work, empaths still operating from wound rather than wisdom. An awakened empath is an entirely different thing. You become someone with perception so refined that manipulation cannot reach you without being immediately identified, not eventually, not after the damage is done and the pattern has repeated itself for the fourth time, immediately. In the first conversation, in the first interaction, in the first moment that something misaligns between what someone is presenting and what they are actually intending. You feel it before it fully forms, and you no longer talk yourself out of what you feel. That shift alone, the shift from feeling the truth and overriding it to feeling the truth and trusting it completely, changes every relationship, every dynamic, every space you occupy, because you are no longer available to be slowly manipulated by patient, incremental boundary testing. You are no longer the person who gives the benefit of the doubt until the benefit has been so thoroughly exhausted that even you cannot justify extending it further. You see it early, you respond early. And that early response, calm, clear, completely without drama, is one of the most powerful things an awakened empath possesses. But here is the weight that comes with that power, the part that nobody romanticizes enough. Because the more clearly you see, the more responsible you become for what you do with that seeing. You cannot claim the gift of refined perception and then use it carelessly. You cannot develop the ability to feel what others cannot feel and then ignore what that feeling is demanding of you. You cannot see manipulation forming in real time and then choose unconsciousness, because consciousness is inconvenient in that particular moment with that particular person. Awakening does not just expand your capacity, it expands your accountability. Every choice you make, from the point of genuine awakening forward, is a fully conscious choice. You can no longer hide behind not knowing. You can no longer claim that you didn't see it coming. You can no longer use confusion as a reason for staying in dynamics that your perception identified as harmful from the very beginning. The weight of that accountability is something that tests awakened empaths more consistently and more profoundly than anything external ever could. Because the real testing doesn't come from the people who are obviously toxic. Those are easy now. Your system identifies them immediately, and your boundaries respond without hesitation. The real testing comes from the people you love, the ones whose limitations you understand completely, whose wounds you can trace back to their origins, whose behavior you can contextualize with a compassion so deep it borders on excusing what should not be excused. The real testing comes in the moments where your empathy and your discernment go to war with each other, where feeling someone's pain pulls in one direction and protecting your own integrity pulls in another, where the healer in you and the guardian in you cannot immediately agree on the right response. That tension, that specific, grinding internal conflict between compassion and boundary is the daily reality of an awakened empath, and navigating it with wisdom rather than reaction, with clarity rather than guilt, with genuine love that does not require self-sacrifice. That is the work that never fully ends. Here is the harsh realization that separates those who fully inhabit awakened empathic power from those who hover permanently at its edge. The test is not whether you can feel deeply. You have always been able to feel deeply. The test is whether you can feel deeply and still hold yourself together. Whether you can absorb the full weight of what your perception reveals. The manipulation, the pain, the inauthenticity, the profound loneliness of seeing too much in a world that sees too little, and remain standing, remain grounded, remain committed to your own truth, even when that truth is isolating, inconvenient, and exhausting to maintain, against the pressure of a world that would prefer you unconscious. That is not a gift you arrived with. That is a capacity you are building, through every boundary held when collapse would have been easier, through every truth spoken when silence would have been safer, through every single moment you chose your own depth over someone else's comfort. You are not becoming more fragile. You are not becoming harder or colder or more removed from the world you were born to feel so deeply. You are becoming something that has no adequate word in ordinary language, something that holds both the full weight of feeling and the full strength of boundaries simultaneously, something that loves without losing itself, that sees without being destroyed by what it sees, that remains open without being endlessly available to be depleted. You are not just becoming more sensitive. You are becoming unbreakable in the exact places that used to break you most. And that is not a small thing. That is everything. This is where it lands. All of it. Every uncomfortable truth and everything you just heard. You are not at the beginning of this journey. You are somewhere in the middle of it, which is exactly why this landed the way it did. Exactly why certain parts of it felt less like new information and more like recognition. Like something you already knew but had, not yet given yourself permission to fully claim. So here is what needs to be said directly, without softening, without the kind of gentle encouragement that lets you nod along and change nothing. Stop waiting for awakening to get comfortable. It will not get comfortable. It will get clearer, more purposeful, more aligned. But it will not get comfortable. Comfort was what you had before. What you are building now is something that does not require comfort, because it is rooted in something far more stable: truth. Stop grieving the connections that couldn't survive your growth as evidence that your growth was wrong. The relationships that fell away when you stopped shrinking were not real connections. They were arrangements, and you have outgrown arrangements. Stop apologizing for the clarity. Stop softening the perception to make others comfortable in their unconsciousness. Stop performing the unawakened version of yourself in spaces that are threatened by how far you've come. You know what you are now. You know what you're capable of feeling, seeing, holding, and understanding. You know the difference between absorbing and empathizing, between people pleasing and genuine compassion, between shrinking and humility. You know. And knowing, real, embodied, hard-won knowing, carries a responsibility that you no longer get to walk away from. The world does not need more empaths who are endlessly available, chronically drained, and quietly disappearing under the weight of everyone else's emotions. The world needs awakened empaths, boundaried, clear, grounded in their own truth, powerful enough to feel everything without being destroyed by it, selective enough to give their depth only where it is genuinely deserved. That is what you are becoming. That is what all of this has been building toward. The only question, the only one that has ever mattered, is whether you are finally ready to stop apologizing for it and start living from it completely.